Although it may seem an anachronism in this age of smartphones and digital music files, a hand-cranked wooden music box that plays a beautiful tune is an impressive project that's both challenging to build and fun to operate. In this video, we'll go through all the steps necessary to construct the wooden drum that holds the pins that operate the pivoting mallets that play the tune on a child's xylophone. After cutting and drilling all 64 slats, as described in the print article, lay them face up and in numerical order on the assembly board, with the numbers running from right to left. After dusting them off, divide the slats into two roughly equal groups, making sure to keep them all in order. Now slide the first group of slats onto a scrap piece of thin plywood or hardboard. Place another thin board over the slats, and quickly and carefully flip the entire group over. Then repeat the process with the other slat group. All the slats should now be face down on the assembly board, with the numbers upside down and running from left to right. Bring the slats together and slide the assembly against the two alignment strips, which have been clamped perfectly square to each other on one corner of the assembly board. Make sure all the slats are pressed tight and flush against the strips. Next, place two pairs of complementary angle wedges made from thin scrap wood against the end slat. Then butt a stick up to the wedges, making sure it's square to the alignment strip. Secure the stick to the board with a few nails or screws. Use your fingers to push each pair of wedges tightly together and thus press the slats together into a continuous surface. Now use a straight scrap to press the slats flat on the assembly board. Next, we're going to glue a piece of canvas onto the back of the slats, just as if we were making a tambour door. I find it easiest to apply the glue by first pouring some onto the canvas, and then squeegeeing it to distribute it into a thin, even layer. Here I'm using a large plastic kitchen pot scraper, but you could also use a thin piece of plywood or a rectangular piece of scrap plastic laminate. Once the glue is evenly spread, flip the canvas over and set it onto the back of the slats, pressing it flat with your hands and removing any air bubbles that may be trapped. Now, using a household iron set on the wool setting, lightly iron the entire surface of the canvas to quickly set the glue and keep it from seeping between slats. Wait 10 or 15 minutes to allow the canvas and glue to cool, then separate the wedges. Now lift the slat assembly from the board, set it on end, and flex the joints between each and every slat to loosen any joints that have become accidentally stuck together. Finally, use a razor to trim excess canvas from the ends of the slat assembly. With the slat assembly face up on the workbench, gently tap the loom pins into their holes. It's not necessary to glue them in. The first step in putting the drum together is to form the slat assembly into a vertical cylinder with the numbered ends pointing up. Now take the pulley disc with the rounded groove in it and set it on the bench top with the rabbited side facing up. Pull 2 or 3 large rubber bands down over the end of the slat cylinder, placing them about 3/4 of an inch from the top. Without applying any glue, flip the cylinder over and set the slats into the rabbited shoulder on the pulley disc. Now apply a coating of glue to both the ends and inside edges of the slats using a small brush or silicone applicator. Brush glue onto the rabbeted shoulder of the non-pulley disc. Wipe off any excess. Then set the disc onto the slat cylinder, aligning the wood's long grain with the open slot in the cylinder. Press the disc down firmly and make sure that there are no gaps left between the ends of the slats and the disc. Now double up 3 or 4 of the large rubber bands and slip them over the end of the cylinder. These will apply enough pressure to clamp the slats and disc firmly together. Before leaving the assembly for the glue to dry, go around the cylinder and make sure all the gaps between slats are nice and even. You can use a small putty knife to open any gaps that are a little too tight. With one end disc glued in place, remove the rubber band clamps, flip the cylinder over, and repeat the gluing process for the pulley disc at the other end. Once the drum assembly is finished, I slip it onto its 3/8" steel axle rod, then temporarily suspend the drum horizontally using a couple of scraps. This makes it easier to fit the final slat that's been cut to fit the gap in the drum. Use a block plane to shave the final slat down until it's a perfect fit. Then apply a little glue to the rabbets in the end discs and set the slat into the gap, using a couple of pieces of masking tape to hold it in place until the glue dries. Now it's time to partially assemble the music box case by screwing the left-hand side to the back, front, and bottom. After sliding the hand crank assembly into its hole in the case, slip 2 fender washers onto the crank's shaft. Then mount the drive pulley, securing it to the shaft with a single number 4 wood screw. Next, slip the round urethane drive belt over the left-hand end of the drum and set it in the case. Fit 2 3/8" fender washers onto the axle and insert the axle into its hole in the left-hand side of the case. After putting fender washers on the other end of the axle, set the music box's pivoting mallet assembly into place. Now you're ready to attach the right side of the case, but before you can screw it on, you must set both the drum axle and the mallet pivot rod into their holes on the inside of the case. Once both sides are screwed in place, it's time to flip all the mallets back out of the way in preparation for setting the xylophone rack and mallet rest assembly into the case. With the rack supports set flush to the inside of the front of the case, secure the xylophone rack with 2 screws, one driven down through each support. The only tasks that remain are to flip the mallets back down and fit the drive belt. Turning the crank makes it easier to get the drive belt onto the large drum pulley, as well as giving you a little preview of the music box in action.